Chapter 3. The path of devastation left behind by the monster was an easy one to follow. All along the coast west of the School of Magic, the gritty sand-like dirt of this part of Nasquat was scoured black in great patches. In some spots, perhaps where there was something to focus on, it was even melted to glass. The blue leaves from hardy shrubs and tall thin trees scattered in the wind intermingled with ashes and smoke. And yet, the destruction was not nearly so total and methodical as it was at the School of Magic. Whatever that wretched being was that had come from the ancient machine Dahlgren, it obviously had places to go in a hurry, more places to destroy, more people to kill. Chesney half berated himself for thinking along those lines. It wasn't going to do him any good dwelling on it. But at the same time, he felt like he didn't deserve the peace of mind of putting it out of his thoughts either. This is my responsibility, he thought. This was my fault. I have to make up for it. But will anything I do ever make up for all the people who died? No, not that died, that I killed. He could not cry any more. His tears had run out, but he still saw them, standing beside collapsed trees, in the corners of his eyes, staring at him silently, so quietly. They did not look burnt or torn or crushed, but they were there when he closed his eyes, and there when he opened them again. He shook his head to refocus. Thinking like that wasn't helping. Taking responsibility is one thing, but, really, what do I even do next? Obviously, I need to find it, and kill it. But, as I am right now, even if I do manage to find it, what then? I'd just be throwing my life away. Chesney's thoughts quieted then. His mind spun in circles as he walked, half minding his surroundings and walking the scorched path along the coast without heed. He wanted so badly to turn and find Tail running to catch up to him. His friend was never the brightest, but was so good at getting out of trouble. "Tail, are you out there?" he whispered into his heart. "I need your help." Instead, he felt the familiar, skittering feeling of the spirit of fire within him. It too was quite uneasy. It wasn't something he could communicate with. Chesney wouldn't even exactly call it alive, either. It was something between a force and a thought, a will, but with no action. Once, Tail had asked him what it felt like. Chesney had said,
"Do you know how sometimes your mind can wander into strange thoughts? Like, standing at a cliff and thinking how easy it would be to step off? Well, with the spirit within me, it is much the same. Only, I will at times look at a thing, and inside my heart I know that thing wants to burn."
When Chesney looked at the sputtering fires along the coast, and the blasted spots, it was as though the spirit merely thought obvious. Perhaps that wasn't even really the right word for the feeling. True. Understandable. Rightness. Chesney scrunched up his face and thought. It feels like looking at the equation 1 equals 1. Correct, but a useless statement outside of a greater context.
Ugh, this isn't helping,
Chesney said out loud.
Stop dawdling and think clearly. What would Tail say if he were standing beside you?
He thought more, then continued speaking aloud.
He wouldn't focus on the school, or everyone that was gone. He'd focus on the big plan, and the little plans to get to the big plan.
He nodded to himself, and continued.
Right, the big plan. I need to get stronger. I need help, and I need a way to get around and follow it.
Looking down at himself, the state he was in, he added,
Step 1, get fixed up and get supplies.
Chesney remembered then that the nearby town of Ratsurk was likely the best place to get started. With some disquiet, he also realized that the path he was walking now led straight to it. At the thought, his heart trilled in fear. His mind became a mixed-up jumble of scenarios. What if the town is destroyed? What if it's not? Can I tell them what happened? Will they blame me? Will they hate me? Kill me? If the town is gone, where else could I even go instead? What if more people have died? Because of me?
I can't tell anyone what happened. If they knew, who knows what they would do?
What he would not say aloud, though, was that the thought of someone finding out and taking revenge was maybe not the worst either. The fate of the world would no longer rest on his shoulders. And the guilt, he could pay with his life, anything to not feel what he felt right now. As ashamed as Chesney felt, though, he still knew in his heart that giving up like that would not help anyone. It would be running away. And I'm not a coward.
If anyone asks why I'm doing this, I'll just say,
he began, speaking to himself again. He turned several words and reasons over in his mind until he settled on basically the truth. He nodded resolutely.
Revenge. For the School of Magic. I will say I am out for revenge against the monster of Dalgran, and nothing will stop me.
Though he knew right now he stood no chance against it, he also felt deeply that nothing would stop him. The only thoughts that could keep the images of flame and ashes and blood from his mind was the next step, and the next. He would keep following one step at a time, because otherwise he would just stop, lay down in the dirt, and let it swallow him up. Less than an hour later, Chesney could finally see the neighboring town of Ratzerk peeking up over the last hill on the horizon. He had been correct. The monster had flown straight towards the town. The path of destruction led right to it, through it, and past it. Seeing small plumes of smoke from the cluster of homes and huts made Chesney's heart sink even lower. Exhausted though he was, he couldn't stop but breaking out into a run. He needed to see the truth of it with his own eyes. Maybe it wasn't bad, or maybe he could help. Anything to try to pay off the unpayable debt he owed to the world. If he could save even one person, it would be one less person staring at him with dead eyes just out of sight. Since his arrival at the School of Magic, Chesney had never been allowed to leave the school grounds. As such, he had never actually been to Ratzerk, and thus didn't have a gauge to know how much or how little the town had been affected by the attack. From this distance, it didn't seem to be too badly damaged, but he could hardly let himself hope. There were plumes of smoke, and some kind of tower structure looked a little damaged. Presently, he came up to the outskirts of the town, where pens of gubo were rushing around in a panic. They were purplish, bulbous, moose-skinned creatures that mostly ate grasses. Apparently, they were so named because of the curious sounds they made when they were upset, because the fields were flooded with their noisome cries of gubobo, gubobo. It looked like some of the fences had been destroyed and only hastily mended. A large male good was in the pen, trying to calm the flock. At least, I think it's a male, Chesney thought, perplexed. While he had never seen one in person, he'd been told a lot about the good from the staff at the magic school. They were a tall, tough, stout race of people. They had a great deal of hair, generally brown or green, on their heads and faces, even the women. Lastly, all of them had a pair of tightly curled horns growing just above where their ears should be. Chesney knew they were a strong and wild-willed people, but even he was surprised when the good in the pen trying to calm the gubo ran after and tackled one to the ground, just to get it to stop moving. Wow, that's incredible. I'd have been flattened by that gubo, Chesney marveled. Chesney continued past the fields and pens and came to the town square. It was a wide square in the center of town, surrounded mostly by a set of squat homes and a few shops. The building here all had a distinct style of softly curving roofs, and everything was made of wood. At present, the square was filled with the townsfolk of Ratzerk. They were all talking at once and over one another. Some were sobbing, some were angry, and there didn't seem to be much order. Chesney could hear a few snippets of what people were arguing over. It sounded like something like this had happened before. He also heard people sobbing the name Midia. Wait, wasn't that the name of the prodigy spiritualist? See, Chesney thought to himself. He hadn't much believed what Tale had told him about her, but at the very least her name was right. I wonder what has happened to her. Over the din of the crowd, though, someone shouted for silence, and a particularly gray around the edges Good stood up on a partially broken platform at the front of the mob, raised his hands in the air and spoke to them. Chesney quietly watched from a distance.
People of Ratzerk, please listen to me.
the old god said loudly with a deep, sonorous voice. The mob quieted down to a murmur and turned to face him.
First, I must thank you all for your quick actions and thinking when we were attacked last night. Thanks to you, nobody was killed. Sadly, some Gubo were eaten by the terrible beast, and many escaped, but almost all have been rounded back up.
A voice shouted up from the crowd.
Do you have an explanation for what that thing was?
The old god turned to look at the speaker, and said,
No, I am not certain, but it came from the neighboring school of magic in which the Tower of Gabnid lies. As such, I fear that the tragedy from 10,000 years ago has returned to Ratsurt. I fear that Dahlgren has been awoken.
At that, there were many cries of anguish, and some of anger.
If that is true, then all of Lennis is doomed. Only the immortals could defeat Dahlgren. Must we just wait for the end? How could this have happened? The ancient machine has been activated.
Chesney wanted to just sink into the ground and disappear.
Enough!
The old god cried, and the mob settled.
I believe there is more afoot here than that terrible beast. During the attack, it seems that the rope network line has been cut, and by the hand of a saboteur.
He gestured to the very tall building Chesney had seen as he approached Ratsurt, and showed in his hands part of a rope that looked to have been cleanly cut with a sharp knife.
And, most terribly, in the confusion of the attack and the rope network sabotage, Midia has...
He trailed off. Oh no. Please don't be dead. Chesney hoped desperately.
Our protectress is gone. My dear, sweet Midia has been kidnapped.
At that, the old god broke into tears and could no longer speak. The crowd cried out in their own anguish, whispering their despair at having lost her. Kidnapped? That doesn't make any sense. The timing is too strange, Chesney thought to himself. Could it all just be a coincidence? The thoughts left him deeply troubled. The assembly wept for long enough that Chesney was beginning to feel like a voyeur to their misery, and was uncomfortable witnessing such a deeply personal moment for the town. But he would not look away. One thing was for certain, though, and that this Midia was obviously very important to everyone, and that the timing couldn't be an accident. He didn't know how, but, somehow, this was related to awakening the ancient machine Dahlgren, and he was going to find out why. Soon, the old man was able to compose himself enough to continue again.
I know that these coming times will be a trial, but it is a trial we all share. Help your neighbor. Have courage. When the great tragedy befell the town 10,000 years past, we endured, and we shall endure again. I will do everything in my power to support you, and to find our dear Midia. Now please, go and tend to your homes, your animals, your families.
Quietly, in a subdued shuffle, the townsfolk turned away from the square and wandered away to their daily tasks, homes, and to what Chesney imagined must be some kind of bar. Through the throng of bodies, Chesney saw the old Good also turn away and enter a home that was a bit larger than all the others. Chesney took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He spoke aloud quietly to himself.
All right. This is my first step. My first chance to make amends.
In his thoughts, he hoped. Tail, Samza, and you too, little Gig. I'll try my best. Please watch over me. Walking up to the door, he knocked. He was way too nervous and basically lovingly caressed the door instead. Slapping the palm of his hand against his forehead, he tried again, more forcefully. Only this time it was far too strong, and he basically banged on the door like a crazy person. A few seconds later, a different Gud, this one shorter, more lithe, and with silky brown hair, opened the door to a completely red-faced Laffrey boy.
Yes? Can I help you, young man?
Chesney couldn't be sure, but he thought this one might be a female. Man, it is really hard to tell with these Good.
I need to speak with the, mayor, about...
he began saying, stammering through his words. It was then he realized he hadn't quite thought out what he was going to say, and so stumbled over how to finish his sentence. An uncomfortable silence spread between the two before he finally blurted out,
Things
It looked as though she was thinking of a way to turn him away, when she looked down at his clothes.
Oh, are you from the School of Magic?
Chesney nodded. She nodded to herself and opened the door further.
Yes, Mayor Mousepar will like a word with you, I think. Please, come this way.
Chesney stepped inside what seemed to be a very simple office. There was a desk, a small kitchenette, some bookshelves, and seats. At the side of the room was a staircase, leading upstairs. The woman, whom Chesney assumed was the mayor's secretary, led him to the stairs and whispered to him,
The mayor has been in such a state since his daughter was abducted. Please try not to agitate him too much, okay?
Chesney nodded and followed her up the stairs. They came to find his office upstairs was a bit more well-furnished than the one below. A painting on the east wall, some furs and other hunting trophies on the west wall. The walls were painted red-brown. The desk was not much nicer than the one downstairs, and tucked into the corner was a pair of beds. The south wall was dominated by a large window, and standing at that window, looking out over the town, was the old good. He stood alone, stooped so low that Chesney thought that he had perhaps fallen over and had just caught himself, but no. He seemed very weak.
Mr. Mayor, sir, I have a...
The secretary began, then winced, and quickly leaned down to whisper in Chesney's ear.
What's your name?
He whispered back to her. She stood up quickly and continued.
Master Chesney from the School of Magic who wishes to speak with you, sir.
The man did not even acknowledge her speaking until the words, School of Magic, were uttered, and then he spun around as quick as he dared and looked right at Chesney. It was all Chesney could do to hold his gaze without succumbing to more guilt, but he managed.
Yes, please, we must talk,
he said, hobbling to the chair at his desk and gesturing to Chesney to join him in the seat across the desk.
Miss Shao, some red leaf tea, if you please. For us?
The woman nodded and headed downstairs to the kitchenette. Chesney sat. When they were alone, Mayor Mousepar eyed Chesney keenly and asked,
Well, what news do you bring from the School of Magic, boy?
Chesney gulped and balled his hands into fists on his knees.
The magic school is...
he began. He opened his mouth to say, destroyed, but his mouth just dried up like a desert. He swallowed, and said instead,
Gone.
Mousepar nodded gravely, and replied,
Yes, I thought as much. I can only assume that somehow, the ancient machine, Dahlgren, has been activated?
Chesney nodded in turn and turned his eyes downward. There was nothing else he wanted to say, so he stayed silent.
I'm not sure if you know it, but this has happened before in Ratzurk's history. Ratzurk and the School of Magic were once part of the same great city, but when Dahlgren was first activated 10,000 years ago, it was destroyed. You may find small ruins of this old city even now in these parts,
he said, reciting history as though beginning a long practice lecture. Chesney wondered if at one point he had been a teacher.
Do you know how it was stopped before?
Chesney asked, hoping for some clue on what to do next. The old good shook his head, though, and said,
I do not. But it was the time of the immortals. Cormu, Sophie, Gabnid, doubtless they had a hand in saving Lennis. With them gone, who knows what hope Lennis has left?
The old man sighed and was silent for a time. Presently, his secretary, Miss Shao, came up the stairs with a little tray, 2 cups, a teapot, a cup of gubo cream, and some shredded sweet leaf. Mousepar waved her away and poured them both some tea. As he worked with shaking hands, he said,
I can't help but notice that you are not who I was expecting to see from the magic school. What of my good friend, Headmaster Dakin?
Chesney had no idea how to respond to this. When he had last seen the headmaster, he was half crazed with delirium and despair. For all he knew, the headmaster walked off into the smoke to die with his students. Maybe I should have stayed to help him. Another screw-up. How could I have just left him like that? Chesney chose a diplomatic answer.
He was alive when I saw him last, but he was unwell. I'm worried about him. Yes, as am I. If it were any other time, I would rush over to his aid myself, but I fear I can barely find the energy to stand these days.
His old eyes grew downcast and moist as he spoke.
Actually, sir, I didn't come and speak with you just because of the school.
At the old Good's quizzical look, Chesney continued.
I want to go and get this Medea back.
This was obviously not the answer the mayor was expecting, because sat up straight in his chair and looked him up and down.
I don't mean to be rude, young man, but you're just a boy yourself. She was abducted in the middle of a terrible attack. No doubt the ones who took her are formidable indeed. If you went, I fear I would just be heaping tragedy upon tragedy.
Chesney had expected this response.
I know that, sir. But I am also a spiritualist.
He held his hand up in front of him, and conjured a bright hot flame that licked hungrily the top of the room, yet left no sooty residue behind. The mayor was shocked into standing and backing away until Chesney quickly snuffed out the flame and continued.
If you let me go, I promise, I'll bring her back.
Giving him a much shrewder look, the mayor reseated himself and asked,
I can see you are at least serious in your request, Mr. Chesney. But can I ask why you are willing to risk your life to bring back this village's protectress?
There was a lot of ways he could respond to this, and Chesney was not sure exactly which route to take. He said,
I suppose the best answer I can give you for that question is that I'm deeply motivated in tracking down this monster that attacked the magic school in Rat Cirque.
The mayor raised an eyebrow.
But, as you can plainly see, the trail of destruction left by it continues out west. I don't understand why you want to help us here. I think the timing of her abduction is very suspicious, and I believe they are related. I don't know how, but I intend to find out.
The old god stroked his graying beard and smirked then.
You have some sense too. I see. I agree. It is a little too convenient.
He stood back up and looked out the window.
Young Chesney, I don't know why, but these old bones tell me there's more to you than meets the eye. And, possibly even more importantly, I have no one else to ask. Medea was the only other spiritualist in all of Ratzer, and those damned mercenaries in the tavern wouldn't even lift a finger for the paltry sum this town could offer them. My daughter, Medea, is the most precious thing in all the world to me. She's this village's protectress, and we are lost without her. Please, go and get her back.
Chesney stood.
I absolutely swear it, sir.
I will do this. I will make a difference. I will save this girl, and this village. Watch me. Tail.
What can you tell me about her abduction? Come, follow me. We shall speak on the way.
Mayor Malspar said, stepping around his desk.
On the way, sir? To what?
Chesney asked, puzzled by the old god's seeming newfound energy.
On the way to get you properly prepared. You look like you fell out of a furnace and into a pile of gubo dung, young man.
Chesney looked down at his filthy burnt rags that currently functioned as clothes.
Yes, you may have a point, sir,
he said, laughing self-consciously and scratching the back of his head. The elderly mayor led him down the stairs, past his surprised secretary, and out the door. He pointed at several buildings that lined the square.
That's the inn, the store, the spiritualist temple, and the pub. First, I want you to go and get cleaned up at the inn. Just tell them I sent you. When you're all cleaned up, meet me back here.
Nodding, he did as he was told. The proprietress at the inn, another lithe, good woman with green hair, seemed to understand immediately what was required, and supplied him with some spare clothes from the lost, and found that miraculously fit him, as well as another pristine blue cloak from the magic school. When he had asked her how she had such a thing on hand, she said that lots of times students snuck out for a night on the town and tended to leave things behind. Why the heck was I never invited to one of these parties? That's just not fair. Thanking her graciously, he went to a room to get washed up. There was a tub there with hot running water somehow. He tried not to take up too much time though, and quickly scrubbed all the dirt, blood, and soot off his body and hair. He was surprised to see the puncture wounds from those heliopods in the tower. It seemed like a lifetime ago. There was still the tiniest mark left behind, pale flesh just slightly paler than his regular fair skin tone. Drying himself off, he sat down on the web and got dressed. As he sat, though, he could feel the soreness already from his ordeals. The medicines could save his life, but that didn't stop his body from loudly complaining about all the damage. Just for a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes and lie back. The bed looked like barely more than a cot on a wooden frame, but it felt like heaven to him. He tried in vain to get back up, but was lost to sleep in a few short breaths. Chesney awoke with a start. He barely remembered falling asleep, and had no idea how long he had slept for, but it couldn't have been for too terribly long because the light from the window was only slightly moved from where he remembered it. He was surprised to find his tattered old clothes had been taken, and a little embarrassed that the woman had seen him sleeping like that. Worried that he had spent too much time idling, he hurried from the room, only to run right into the mayor. The mayor had evidently got some of his vigor back, because Chesney was the one who ended up falling backwards from the collision.
Sorry, sir, for keep you waiting. I accidentally fell asleep. I had quite the morning,
he said, blushing slightly.
Quite all right, lad Dot. You will need all your strength. Now, let's go to the shop,
Mayor Mousepar said, leading him along.
So, you said you had some information on Midia's abduction, sir?
Chesney asked as they walked out of the inn and across the square.
Yes, I had several very reliable people tell me they witnessed Midia being dragged south, and there is only one thing that way, Resutor Island. An island? So, there's nowhere else they could have gone? No, young man, the only way out of this area of Nasquat is over the bridge just west of Ratzer. Nobody has come by that way, and so we can be sure that if the abductor is anywhere, it is on that island. As for what they are doing there, I couldn't say. All right. Well, anything you can tell me about the island, then?
Chesney asked.
It is home to some rather stronger creatures than your common heliopod or pack rat, so you had best get prepared. Ah, here we are.
At that, they arrived at a store lining the public square. As they entered, Mousepar told the owner that Chesney has been hired to go and find Midia, and to outfit him as best he could. At the mention of what Chesney was doing, the shop owner practically squealed and quickly rummaged in their stock.
Oh, our poor, sweet Midia,
the man who ran the store said through sniffs as he tried fitting Chesney with this and that.
When she came to us 13 years ago, we've had nothing but a run of good luck ever since. So sweet, and helpful, and oh, I miss her already.
In a short time, Chesney was fitted with some slight protective equipment for his torso, head, legs, arms, and feet. The survival knife he had used up until now was replaced with something between a knife and a short sword. It was light, and easy to swing, and had a good edge to it. To an adult it would have been too little, but for someone his size, it fit quite well. Chesney was surprised the shop even carried things that would fit him, but he wasn't going to question it. Just then, the owner spied the bottle of medicine on his belt.
Oi, you got one of them bottles. Here, let me have a gander.
Shrugging, Chesney pulled it out and handed it to the proprietor.
Ah, yep, this is the genuine article, all right. One sec, let me fill it back up.
Genuine article? Was there a lot of counterfeits or something? Chesney had no idea, but waited to see what happened next. The owner went behind his counter and picked a huge glass jar out from underneath. Inside the jar were thousands of pills shaped just like the ones Chesney had taken from the bottle. The owner measured out a handful of pills from the jar, filled the bottle, and handed it back to Chesney.
Now, you come back here right away if you need more. I'll do anything I can as long as you're looking for our precious little poppet.
Chesney had a very hard time imagining any children of the hardy Good could qualify under the term precious poppet, but he sure wasn't going to say that. That out of the way, as they left, the mayor turned to Chesney.
All right, young man, there are some more things I absolutely need to attend to. You should be all set, or at least as fully prepared as I can help with. I recommend you take a visit to the Spiritualist Temple. They can also help you, I'm sure of it. And, If you can manage to convince them, there's some mercenaries in the tavern that you might be able to hire to help you. Maybe you'll have better luck than me,"
he said, speaking the last part bitterly.
"Good luck."
He stared into Chedsney's eyes with an unreadable expression.
"Please, save my precious daughter."
And then he shuffled dejectedly back to his office. Chedsney's heart went out to him, and he hoped that the rest of the world was faring as well as Ratzirk was. He supposed he'd soon see. For now, he needed to prepare. He turned to view the spiritualist temple. The building was something of an outlier next to all the other buildings in Ratzirk. In front was a very wide staircase made of stone, becoming less and less wide with each step, until it reached the double doors at the top. At the base of the staircase, at both ends, was a statue of a globe. The globe was covered in runes, numbers, and diagrams. The great double doors were black and gold, with an embossed globe on them as well. Hanging from the roof were pairs of other symbols. Chedsney guessed they were symbols of all the different kinds of spirits. He felt like he would have easily recognized what spirit this temple was dedicated to a month ago, but school was an eternity away in his mind now, and he was no longer sure. Plucking up some courage, he took to the stairs. When he reached the large, intimidating doors, he hesitated a moment before them. They were beautiful, smooth, and polished. If it had been attacked, it certainly didn't show. The details on the embossed globe were so intricate as well. As he was admiring the engravings, the doors began to open inwards. He started in surprise, and as the gap opened he saw that the doors were being opened by two ancient-looking people. Chedsney gawked. He had absolutely no clue what race these two men were from, but it didn't seem to match anything he had been told about the other races of Lennis. They wore dark purple robes, and their skin was a dark greenish-gray color. Thick droopy lips and a perpetual frown, and a firm ridge on their heads that looked to curl over their heads. The description sounded almost like the Fee Orla in Sasquatch, but it didn't seem quite right. The only explanation he could think of was that perhaps these were Lubot. Lubot was the catch-all name for anyone who was of mixed race. Most races tended to stick to their own, but there were a few very rare children that were from two different races. They took on aspects of both races. Maybe that was it. Or, maybe, these two ancient men were something else altogether. Chedsney was learning that there was far more to this world than he ever dreamed. One of the elderly gentlemen spoke to him, reaching out his hand.
"Ah, you have come to us at last, Master Chedsney. The mayor told us you would be arriving soon. Come inside. There is much to learn."
His voice was the definition of absolute calm and peace. There was no great age to it, either. It was strong and sure, not at all what he expected to come from the wrinkled form. Gingerly, the Laffrey boy stepped through the threshold and into the temple. The interior was very sparse, the floor polished smooth. There were no pieces of furniture at all, save for a single large carpet in the center of the room. It was pristine, colorful, and emblazoned in the center was the globe symbol. All about the room were sconces for lights, incense, and an altar at the far end. The altar was like a window recessed into the wall, with the shutters opened wide. The shutters had dozens of lines of text in an unfamiliar alphabet. Chedsney had never quite seen anything like it. It was nothing like the magic school. The pair led him to the center of the carpet and gestured for him to sit. He did so, and the two sat in front of him. The air was cloudy from incense. The longer he breathed, the more it felt as though the world was underwater. It was not a dulling sensation, though. It was instead more focusing, more weighty. Gravity was here, and it was tugging at him now. The spirit of fire within him was tittering in wonder. It felt something more. The pair closed their eyes and spoke in unison.
"Tell us, Master Chedsney, which spirit do you already possess?" Fire, Masters. "Tell us, what do you know of the spirit? What are the spirits? How are they connected to magic?"
Chedsney stammered, not prepared for these kinds of questions. He should really know, but was a little intimidated at speaking to these two spiritualist leaders.
You Well, I think there are 8 spirits, and I guess I don't really know what they are or what they do.
They nodded and spoke again.
Yes, you're correct. In this universe, there are 8 spirits. Each spirit is like the will of a force that governs all aspects of reality. A spirit is not so much a thing or being. It is an open line of connection between yourself and the universe. As such, magic is much like a conversation. Do you understand?
Chesney squinted. This was a lot to take in right now, but he tried to remain calm and open to the teaching.
I think so. It's kind of a lot to understand at once.
He began. He thought of how it felt to be in tune with the spirit of fire, and asked a question.
Masters, when I feel the spirit of fire inside of me, it's almost like a sentient being, but at the same time, it is not. Can you tell me why that is?
Again, as one, they spoke in their clear, calm voices. The voices filled the room, as though it was a bell, and their voices the hammer that had struck it.
In a way, your communion with the spirit is like a book that you write together. The spirit is absolute. It is all the laws of the universe writ large for all to read. But how you read them, and how they make you feel, affects that interaction. In this way, the way the spirit feels to you is a reflection of what you feel through it.
They continued.
To master a spirit and control its force is not something you can simply be given or taken. It is a process that takes time. Just as 2 friends must come to know and understand one another before they can work together efficiently, so too must a spiritualist foster their connection with the spirit. Now, Master Chesney, quiet the spirit inside you. Listen to the sounds of the world, and prepare to understand.
Somewhere, a tinkling of bells, the long, droning hum of voices in unison. He was aware, now, in a way that he had not been ever before in his life. His body was there, sitting, but his awareness was expanding to something else. Somewhere else. It was as though he was in a great hall, and all around him were beings that were and were not. Cutting through his soul, more words.
Master Chesney, do you know what spirit this temple is devoted to? No, Masters. It is a spirit that governs the laws of this world. The proper passage of time, that one thing leads to the next, and not the other way around. That the elements come together to create the universe. That naught may exceed or recede. Is reality. Do you know its name, Master Chesney?
He found that he did.
Sphere, Masters. Yes. Good. You're beginning to feel the handle of the door. It is knocking.
Chesney could feel something. Some feeling between desire, impatience, tautology.
I feel something, Masters, but I do not understand.
Another tinkling of bells. The smell of incense like a set of footsteps into the truth. Twin voices, like a gong.
The spirit of sphere regulates how the elemental spirits interact in the universe. As such, they have a deep connection. Open your thoughts to the spirit of fire within you. What is it saying?
Chesney breathed deep and felt in his soul for the power of fire within him. It was strong now. He could feel it like a heart beating in his hand. It was reaching. It was wanting. But to what? Chesney still could not sense.
I don't know. I can feel something it wants, but I can't sense what it is wanting. Just as you and your spirit coexist in communion, so too do the spirits. They have relationships with each other. They want to talk. They want to exchange. They want to create anew. Now, feel deep inside, Master Chesney. Fire wants to talk to sphere. What would fire want from the base power of reality?
In a sudden flash of insight, Chesney realized that the answer to that question was answered long before it had been asked.
Sirs, it wants more. It wants to burn more, burn greater.
And then, he felt it. Sphere wants to help it burn. With a gasp of air as though he had been drowning, Chesney sat up and opened his eyes in shock. He was filled with power, and that power wanted to burn. His body, moving almost without his knowledge, raised up both hands. Fire wanted out. It wanted to burn bright, but there was something wrong. It would not come.
Masters, I cannot. I can feel their desire to burn more, but it doesn't come. I don't understand. It's filling me more and more, but it cannot escape.
He screwed his eyes tight, feeling the power within him build, filling him, overfilling him. 2 hands pressed against his temples.
That is what fire and sphere wish together, but sphere has its own desire. It will not agree to help until you understand. You've opened the door, but you must invite it in. Master Chesney, think, feel. What does sphere want to do?
What does sphere want to do? What does sphere want to do? What does sphere want? Sphere is all. It has all. Sphere wants for nothing. Sphere wants nothing. Sphere wants for all to not. Sphere wants everything to stop. Everyone. Everything. Well,
Freeze!
Chesney shouted, and from him, a great and terrible fire erupted from his hands into the air above them. It filled every space and devoured every ounce of air. It wanted to eat and burn every delicious thing in this prison, and then eat the next prison and the next. Just as the fire had grown to fill its prison in full and threatened to burn them all in its hunger, a new surge turned his veins cool again. In a flash the fire, the elderly masters, the motes of dust, the ringing bells all stopped, frozen in time. With a start, Chesney fell over, and realized he was the only thing in the room not frozen. In a few breaths, he took in everything again. He could see every thin tendril of fire reaching through the air. The 2 elder masters' hands reached to where his temples had been, and tiny finger symbols in the other, mid-strike, and within him he could feel a great revel. Where once had been a simple tittering flame, was now a sputtering fire, and beside it, something spinning, moving, knowledge, rule, thought. They were excited, chattering, yelling, laughing, cackling, screaming. Chesney furrowed his brow and let out a long breath. Enough! As though caught with their hands in the cookie jar, both spirits sputtered and stammered and quieted. Above, the flames dissolved, falling back in on itself and pulling back and into him. And when they had done so, a low gonging noise seemed to build in volume and speed. As it did, the room began to move again, until the great low gong became the mere tinkling of a chime. The spell was broken. Somehow, the 2 masters did not show any surprise. They folded their arms together into their robes and stood as one.
Well, what was all that?
Chesney asked, in awe of what had just happened. The 2 masters looked at each other and smiled, perhaps a little mischievously, before one said,
Let's just call it the crash course.
He looked at his hands, at the new feelings edging for his attention.
Will it be like this for every spirit?
The pair thought for a moment. The other answered,
The first time you learn a new spirit is always the hardest. You instinctively understand your talent, but opening the door and inviting in a new friend is always the first great hurdle. Each time, you will have new voices to help you understand, and it shall be easier.
Chesney felt that the power within him, there, strong, familiar, was fire. He could feel that first feeling, the small fire all on its own. He called it forth, and his fire was like it usually was. Then, he called them both together, and this time the fire was wider, greater. It also took a much greater toll on his energy, and his knees felt weak. Taking a gulping breath, he then faced the power of sphere within. Sphere was strange, and very alien. If he gave in to it, he felt like he could count corners on windows for the remainder of his life, until he starved to death. He held out his hand and felt the power of sphere, reality, and cast it out into the air. In a small area in front of him, he could see that the tiny motes of smoke and dust froze again for just a few moments, before continuing.
Masters,
Chesney began, thinking back to what they had said.
Earlier, You said that learning to communicate with spirits enhances their power and our ability to work together. But I feel like right now fire is much stronger than sphere. Shouldn't they feel the same? Are some spirits weaker than others?
The masters chuckled.
Ah, Master Chesney, you have only partially understood the lesson. We said, just as two friends must come to know and understand one another before they can work together efficiently, so too must a spiritualist foster their connection with the spirit. And that is true. But you have failed to understand the greater reality. Tell me, young master, you have made friends before, yes? Come to understand all their quirks and likes and dislikes.
Chesney slowly nodded, not really wanting to add that they were all dead.
Ah, wonderful. So now that you have a friend like that, tell me, what is my favorite food?
One asked.
Wah!
Chesney replied, perplexed.
How would I know that? No? Okay. Perhaps you know what I had for breakfast today? You're not making any sense, Master. I have only just met you today. I wouldn't know that.
At that, they both smiled and stared at him. Chesney felt embarrassed that it was obvious he was missing something. He played through what they had said in his mind. To improve his ability with spirits, he must foster that connection. And he had. But then why was his connection to fire so much greater than spear? Unless... It is not a connection to spirits in general I must foster, but a connection with each spirit individually. That's it. Each spirit is unique, and my ability to commune with one doesn't improve my ability to commune with another. His realization showed on his face, and the master nodded knowingly.
Very good, young master. Now here, take this, and regain your strength.
They handed him a cup of something warm and salty. As he drank it, it seemed to fill him with a soothing feeling not unlike the fast-acting medicine, only a bit more filling and natural. With the new spirit within him, Chesney felt pleased, proud. He had taken a real step forward in becoming stronger. His goals were closer. He would become a great spiritualist. He would stop Dahlgren. To the masters, he smiled and said,
Thank you so much for your teachings, masters.
As they led him back towards the doors, they said in unison,
Before you stands a great mountain, Master Chesney. You have taken that first step, but there's much farther to go. But if you keep taking steps like that, you will find yourself on the other side before long.
With a great big cheesy grin, Chesney smiled, bowed, and ran off down the road. As the two masters watched him go, one turned to the other and asked,
Did you remember to charge him?
His companion looked to the other.
Wait, you didn't already?
They both smacked their foreheads with their palms and began quietly bickering with each other as they closed the great doors. Feeling energized with his newfound power, Chesney felt on top of the world. He wanted to run all the way south out of town, straight to the island, and show whoever was there just what he was capable of. Don't be careless, Chade's old buddy. Chesney stopped in his tracks. He could almost feel his friend Tail beside him, chiding him. That's just what he used to say when he was about to get in over his head. Yes, Tail, I will. He thought to himself, I am just a kid right out of school. I need help, and I know just where to get it. His feet stamped determinedly towards the bar. It felt weird, going to a place like that. He wasn't old enough to be drinking, of course, but that's not what he was going for, so it would be fine, right? There was a knot of unease in his stomach as he stood before the door. Wincing, he quietly opened it and stepped inside. Growing up in a fishing village, Chesney was used to bars being noisy, raucous places where the party seemed to go on all night and into the morning, punctuated with a few fights or games. This bar was more like a tomb. The chairs were filled with silent, depressed patrons looking into their drinks. Some seemed to already be passed out. There was a piano in the corner, but it was quiet and empty. Nobody even glanced in his direction. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. To be ignored like that. He felt like a fool just standing there, but it took him a few furtive glances around the room to decide on what to do. He took a shaky step, then a second more confident one towards the bar. Chesney approached at an empty seat at the bar, and opened his mouth to ask, when the bartender spoke before he could get a sound out, not even looking up from the glass he was polishing.
Kid, I don't know why you're in a place like this, but you need to turn around and get out of here. It's the end of the world. Go find your family. Who knows how much time you got? Don't waste it in this hole.
He had been prepared for a lot of potential ways this discussion would start, but the utterly bleak opener from the bartender left him speechless for several long, awkward seconds as he reorganized his thoughts. Chesney supposed he was going to have to get used to seeing despair like this. He cleared his throat, then said,
I'm looking to hire some mercenaries. I heard there were some here.
The bartender looked at him a second, then grunted a chuckle. Wordlessly, he gestured to a table where two men sat near a fire, quietly chatting over drinks. They didn't have those same looks of despair everyone else had, but instead, something else. It was wary. It was determined. It was like his body felt waves of force telling him, stay away the closer he got. An aura of authority. The eyes of killers. The smell of blood no amount of washing would ever wash away. He wondered if they could smell it themselves too, like he could never stop smelling an ever-burning, unquenchable fire. Was that how he smelled to other people now? He didn't know. He would never ask. The two men were strong-looking warriors. One was a strong-looking Skuru man with blue hair slicked back over his head. His yellow cloak hid the great wings on his back. On the sides of his head were very large ears. The Skuru were a nomadic race that flew the skies of Nasquat. Chesney thought he remembered hearing something of them maybe living nearby, but he couldn't remember anything specific. The man had a few weapons tied to his hip and seemed to be in the prime of his life. Across from his sat an older man, Lafayette. His movements were always subtle, subdued, and precise. When he took a drink, it was always in the smooth motion that you almost didn't notice because his intense eyes were impossible to look away from. His hair was pure white, and most of his head was hidden by a great purple hood. His eyebrows were also intimidatingly large. On his forehead was a tattoo of some spirit. It was obvious he was a very powerful spiritualist. When Chesney walked up to their table, they didn't even bother glancing at him. He tried to cough politely to get their attention, which they also completely ignored. He was torn between being more embarrassed in this moment than any other time in his life, and being indignantly angry at how he was being so rudely ignored. Eventually, anger won out.
Excuse me, sirs,
he said, with unveiled sarcasm at the honorific.
I was told that there were mercenaries here. I wanted to...
The younger Skuru man sighed over Chesney talking, and gave him a deadly-looking side-eyed glance as he said, interrupting,
Look, Wirt died. No merc wants to get hired by some punk kid like you. Now, I don't know if the mayor put you up to this. Likewise I was going to care more if a little kid with puppy eyes came and asked me, but my rate starts, sir, at 8k. Those pockets of yours don't look particularly overflowing with money, so do us both a favor. Stop embarrassing yourself, and buzz off.
Chesney had been wrong. He could feel more embarrassed. He wanted to cry. He wanted to run away. He wanted to slap the bastard. Instead, he mastered himself long enough to silently turn around, and rigidly march towards the door.
Hey, kid.
He stopped. The voice, obviously from the older Leffery man, continued.
Number 1 rule of being a merc. Don't die out there. No use to anyone when you're dead. Remember that. See you around.
Chesney listened, then continued walking out the door. He thought up a litany of curses to the arrogant mercenaries. He had thought of ways to appeal to them, so save a little girl or promises of money or favors. But they had just brutally shut him down like that with so much disrespect. It made him so mad he turned on his heels to look at the bar's exterior. A cruel part of him was so mad he just wanted to watch it burn. But that was not what his magic was for, and he couldn't afford to waste time. Angrily, he stomped off towards the south exit of Ratzurk. Before he even got to the fields of Gubo, though, a voice called out to him. He turned to see that it was Miss Chow, the mayor's secretary, jogging towards him with her hair and beard dancing in the breeze. I will never get used to the beards on the girls, he thought. Then, he thought of what a small beard would look like on a little girl gut and shuddered. Please let Midia not have a beard yet. I won't be able to take it. Panting, the woman stopped to catch her breath, before speaking.
I'm glad I caught you. Mr. Chesney, I wanted to ask you to do me a favor.
Chesney tilted his head and raised his small eyebrows. What else could they possibly want me to do?
You're going to Resutor Island, right?
She continued. He nodded.
Good. You'll likely see another man there. Fritz. Fritz. He likes to live out on his own for some reason. He's really very kind. I want to go visit him, but it's just so dangerous out there now. If you see him, could you tell him I'm thinking about him and see if he can come back to Ratzurk to see me?
The look on her face was something between hopeful and love-struck. Completely unbidden, his mind wandered to what it must look like if a male and female goat, both with beards, looked when they kissed. He shook his head vigorously to rid his mind of the intrusive thoughts, then realized it looked like he was saying no, so stammered.
Yep. Sure. I can do that.
She seemed to not notice, and looked at him dreamily.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good luck out there.
Before wandering off, muttering about Fritz. Chesney shook his head in disbelief at the exchange. He supposed he should be happy that such hopeful thoughts could still exist at a time like this, but it was still very strange to be asked to deliver a love confession while on a rescue mission. Turning back to the south road, he looked towards the horizon. There, in the distance, past some sparse wooded areas, crumbled ruins, and a tiny speck of a bridge, stood a hulking island. Resutor Island. It was tall, rocky, covered in dense trees, and surrounded by a thin beach. It seemed like there was any number of hiding places in a place like that. He had his work cut out for him, and something told him that if he didn't find her very soon, he never would. Shouldering his pack and making sure his new armor and long dagger were properly secured, he started marching along the road at a steady pace. Hold on, Midia thought. Someone is coming for you.